The massive gates of the Valith royal palace opened with a sound that reminded Kong Minho of thunder rolling across mountains. He stood with the other members of Earth's diplomatic team, trying not to show how nervous he felt. His uniform was pressed perfectly, but he kept checking it anyway. This was humanity's first real chance to make an impression on the galactic stage, and he was just an engineer who happened to be part of the honor guard. The Valith were beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. Their skin looked like crystal catching light, shifting between pale blue and silver as they moved. They were tall, much taller than humans, and they moved with a grace that made Minho feel clumsy just watching them. But what really set them apart was their telepathy. They could read minds, share thoughts directly, and communicate in ways humans couldn't even imagine. Ambassador Choi Yuna led their group through the palace halls. She had briefed them all multiple times about proper behavior, about not embarrassing Earth, about remembering that they represented their entire species. Minho's friend Ji Woong walked beside him, looking uncomfortable in his formal uniform. Behind them, Minho's younger sister Hanyul kept whispering excitedly about the alien architecture and biology. "Stop gawking," Ji Woong muttered to her. "You're making us look like tourists." "We are tourists," Hanyul shot back. "We're literally the first humans to ever visit this world." The palace was preparing for the choosing ceremony, an event that happened once every few centuries when a member of the royal family needed to select a consort. Princess Alira, heir to the Valith throne, would choose her future husband from among the greatest nobles in the galaxy. It was being broadcast to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. Earth had been invited to observe as a courtesy, a way to welcome humanity into galactic society. They were shown to a viewing area reserved for minor delegations. Minho could see representatives from dozens of species he'd only read about in briefing documents. The Krevish looked like walking armor, all scales and muscle. The Lumari seemed to be made of living light. The Thevan had too many limbs and eyes that glowed softly in the dim palace lighting. The ceremony began with music that Minho could feel in his bones. Princess Alira entered the grand hall, and even from a distance, Minho understood why she was considered the most eligible individual in the galaxy. She wore robes that seemed to be made from starlight itself. Her crystalline skin caught the light from 1,000 sources, creating rainbows in the air around her. But it was her eyes that caught Minho's attention. They looked sad, he thought. Tired. One by one, the suitors presented themselves. Lord Thevan of the Valith High Houses offered territories and political alliances. A Kravish warlord demonstrated his strength by lifting a piece of palace architecture. A Lumari prince created beautiful patterns of light that brought gasps from the audience. Each presentation was more impressive than the last. During a break in the ceremony, servants brought refreshments. The diplomatic teams were allowed to mingle in one of the side halls. Minho found himself near a window, looking out at the alien city below. It was beautiful and strange, with buildings that defied Earth's understanding of physics. "You find our city interesting?" A voice said behind him. Minho turned and froze. Princess Alira stood there, without her formal robes, wearing something simpler. She was even more striking up close. Her guard stood at a respectful distance, but she was clearly breaking protocol by approaching him. "Your Highness," Minho managed, bowing awkwardly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You're one of the humans," she said, tilting her head slightly. "I've been curious about your species. May I?" Before he could ask what she meant, Minho felt something touch his mind. It didn't hurt, but it was strange, like someone knocking on a door he didn't know existed. He felt her presence trying to read his thoughts, the way she apparently could with everyone else. But something unexpected happened. Instead of the clear window into his mind that she was used to, Alira encountered chaos. Human thoughts weren't organized like Valith thoughts. They were messy, contradictory, full of emotions and memories, and half-formed ideas all tangled together. She couldn't read him clearly at all. And beneath that chaos, she sensed something she hadn't felt from any of the formal suitors. Genuine curiosity about her as a person, not as a prize to be won. "Fascinating," she whispered. "Your mind is like a storm." "I'm sorry?" Minho said, confused. "I don't understand." She looked at him more closely. "What is your name?" "Kang Minho, Your Highness." "I'm an engineer with a diplomatic vessel." "An engineer," she repeated. "Not a noble, not a warrior, not a politician. Just an engineer," Minho confirmed. "I'm really just here as part of the honor guard. I'm not important." Something in her expression changed. "Not important," she said softly, as if the words meant something different to her. One of her guards approached and whispered something. Alira nodded and looked at Minho one more time. "It was interesting to meet you, Engineer Kang Minho." Then she was gone, swept back toward the ceremony hall. Ji Woong appeared at Minho's elbow. Was that the princess? What did she want? "I have no idea," Minho said honestly. "She asked my name and said my mind was like a storm." "That's weird," Ji Woong said. "Come on, the ceremony is starting again." They returned their seats. The final suitors made their presentations. Lord Fevrin seemed particularly confident, his psychic display creating beautiful illusions throughout the hall. Everyone seemed to expect that he would be chosen. He was powerful, well-connected, from an ancient Valith family. The match made perfect political sense. Princess Alira stood from her throne. The hall fell completely silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. She would walk forward and place her hand on her chosen consort's shoulder, binding them together in front of the entire galaxy. She stepped down from the royal platform. She walked past Lord Fevrin without even glancing at him. She walked past the Kravish warlord, the Lumari prince, and representatives from a dozen other powerful species. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Then she did something that made absolutely no sense. She walked directly toward the section where the minor delegation sat. She walked toward the human delegation. She stopped in front of Minho, who was too shocked to even stand up. In the ancient language of the Valith, loud enough for everyone to hear, Princess Alira spoke clearly. "I want him." The hall erupted. Nobles shouted. Guards moved forward, uncertainly. Ambassador Yuna looked like she might faint. Ji Woong grabbed Minho's arm hard enough to hurt. Hanil started laughing in disbelief. And Minho, still sitting in his chair, looked up at the most powerful woman in the galaxy and managed to say the only thing that came to his mind. "Are you sure?" Alira smiled, a real smile that transformed her face from beautiful to something warmer. "I am very sure, Engineer Kang Minho, more sure than I have been of anything in a very long time." The Emperor rose from his throne, his face unreadable. The Empress covered her mouth with one hand. Lord Fevrin looked like he wanted to start a war right there in the ceremony hall. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Minho realized that his simple life as an engineer had just become impossibly complicated. But when he looked at Alira's hopeful expression, at the first genuine emotion he'd seen from any of the Valith nobles, he found himself standing up. "Okay then," he said, which was probably the worst thing to say at a formal royal ceremony. But it was too late to take it back. The galaxy would never be the same. The emergency council meeting lasted 6 hours. Minho wasn't allowed inside, but he could hear the shouting even through the palace's thick walls. Ambassador Yuna had disappeared into the meeting immediately after the ceremony, leaving the rest of the human delegation to wait in their assigned quarters. Ji Woong stood guard at the door, like he expected assassins at any moment. He probably wasn't wrong to be worried. "This is insane," Ji Woong said for the 100th time. She just met you. She doesn't know you. Why would she do this? Minho sat on a chair that was designed for someone much taller than him, his feet barely touching the floor. I don't know. She said something about my mind being different. Maybe she was just curious. Curious enough to choose you in front of the entire galaxy? Hanul was scrolling through her datapad, reading news feeds from across the Imperium. Oh, you're famous now. Look at this headline. Princess shocks galaxy with primitive choice. That's nice and respectful. What are the others saying? Minho asked, not sure he wanted to know. Lots of outrage. Some confusion. A few people think it's romantic. Most think it's a disaster. There's a betting pool on how long before you're quietly sent home. Haniel looked up from her screen. The odds aren't good, brother. The door opened and Ambassador Yuna finally emerged. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. She sat down heavily and accepted a cup of water from one of her aides. Well? Ji Woong demanded. What's happening? The Emperor is furious. The Empress is conflicted. Half the council wants to void the ceremony and pretend it never happened. The other half is arguing about whether that would cause more problems than it solves. Yuna rubbed her temples. The princess refuses to change her choice. She's been absolutely firm about it. So what does that mean for Minho? Haniel asked. Yuna looked at Minho with something like pity. It means you're going to have to prove you're worthy of her. The Emperor has invoked the ancient trials of worth. If you pass, the Union stands and humanity gains full membership in the Imperium. If you fail, you go home and we go back to being an interesting footnote in galactic history. Trials? Minho felt his stomach drop. What kind of trials? The kind designed for alien nobles with telepathic powers, superior strength, advanced technology, and centuries of training, Yuna said bluntly. You have 1 week to prepare. The first trial begins next Monday. Ji Woong swore in Korean. Haniel looked worried. Minho just felt numb. Can I refuse? You can, Yuna said. But that would humiliate the princess and guarantee that Earth remains isolated from galactic civilization for at least another generation. So no pressure. That night, Minho couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony of his quarters, looking out at the alien city. The stars were different here, constellations he'd never seen from Earth. Everything was different. And somehow, he was supposed to prove he deserved to stand beside a princess who could read minds and whose smallest decision affected billions of lives. Small device on his bedside table chimed softly. When he picked it up, words appeared in English. Meet me in the palace gardens. The eastern gate. 1 hour. Come alone. Hey, he should have told Ji Woong. He should have informed Ambassador Yuna. Instead, Minho found himself slipping out of his quarters and making his way through the palace hallways. He got lost twice before finding the eastern garden gate. Alira waited there, wearing a simple cloak that hid her distinctive crystalline skin. She looked relieved when she saw him. You came. I wasn't sure you would. I probably shouldn't have, Minho admitted. But I have questions. I imagine you do. She led him deeper into the garden, to a spot where the plants formed a natural screen. We don't have much time before the guards notice I'm gone. Ask your questions. Why me? Minho said, You could have anyone. Why choose a human you barely know? Alira was quiet for a moment. Do you know what it's like to never be alone in your own mind? To know that everyone around you can read your thoughts, see your feelings, know your secrets? Valith culture is built on telepathy. We value mental openness, shared consciousness. But it also means I've never had privacy, never had mystery. She turned to look at him directly. Every suitor who presented themselves today, I could read them perfectly. Lord Thevrin thinks of me as a stepping stone to greater power. The Crabbish warlord sees me as a trophy. The Lumari prince sees a political alliance. I could see all their thoughts, their calculations, their ambitions. Not one of them saw me as a person. And I'm different because you can't read my mind? Minho asked. You're different because when I tried to read your mind, all I could sense was genuine curiosity about who I was. Not what I could give you, not what advantage I represented. Just interest in me as a person. She smiled sadly. Do you have any idea how rare that is when you're royalty? When you can read minds. Minho thought about that. I guess I never considered it from that angle. But that doesn't mean I'm qualified to be your consort. I'm just an engineer from a planet that barely has space travel. I don't know anything about running an empire or galactic politics. No, you don't, Alira agreed. But you're resourceful, aren't you? Humans have a reputation for adapting to impossible situations. Your species survived ice ages and plagues and nearly destroyed yourselves multiple times, yet you're still here. You solve problems in ways no one expects. That's different from passing trials designed for alien superbeings, Minho said. What are these trials, anyway? There are 5 traditional trials, Alira explained. They test different aspects of worthiness. The trial of mind, the trial of combat, the trial of wisdom, the trial of artistry, and the trial of union. Each one is designed to be difficult for the competitors. For you, they'll be nearly impossible. That's encouraging. But they're not unbeatable, Alira said quickly. The trials test worthiness, but they don't define what worthiness means. Everyone will expect you to fail because you're not like the other candidates. That might be your advantage. How? Because the trials had become predictable. Everyone approaches them the same way, using the same gifts, the same strategies. But you think differently. Human minds work differently than any species in the Imperium. Use that. A sound in the distance made Alira tense. I have to go. They're looking for me. But Minho, I meant what I said. I want this. I want you. Not because I think it will be easy, but because for the first time in my life, I have a choice that's mine alone. She started to leave, then turned back. One more thing. The first trial is the trial of mind. It's a psychic labyrinth that adapts to your deepest fears and uses them against you. Every species that enters it relies on their mental powers to overcome it. You don't have those powers. So how do I pass? Alira's smile was mysterious. Maybe you don't play their game at all. Then she was gone, leaving Minho alone in the alien garden with more questions than answers. The next morning, Ambassador Yuna assembled a team to help Minho prepare. She brought in every human expert they had, everyone who knew anything about the Valith or the trials. A woman named Park Sujin, their cultural attaché, had studied Imperium history and knew more about the trials than anyone. The trial of mind has never been beaten by someone without psychic abilities, Sujin said, showing them historical records. But it's also never been attempted by someone without psychic abilities. The labyrinth is part technology, part psychic construction. It reads your mind and creates challenges based on what it finds there. What kind of challenges? Minho asked. It's different for everyone. Usually manifestations of fears, doubts, personal demons. The trick is to master your mind, to overcome the psychological attacks. But you can't do that because you can't fight psychically. Haniel had been studying the labyrinth's technical specifications. Wait, look at this. The psychic components are layered over a physical structure. The structure has to exist in real space because some competitors have physical bodies. So underneath all the mental tricks, there's actual architecture. So what? Ji Woong asked. So maybe Minho doesn't try to win the psychic game, Haniel said. Maybe he treats it like an engineering problem instead. Minho looked at the diagrams his sister was showing him, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he felt a small spark of hope. "Can you get me more detailed schematics of the labyrinth structure?" "Probably not," Sujin said. "That information would be restricted." "Then I'll have to figure it out on site," Minho said. He looked at the team around him, at his sister's encouraging expression, at Ji Woong's protective stance, at Ambassador Yuna's calculating eyes. "Okay, let's do this." The first trial was 6 days away. Minho had a lot of work to do. The trial of mind took place in an ancient chamber beneath the palace. Minho stood at the entrance to the labyrinth, wearing a simple suit of protective gear. Around him, thousands of aliens filled viewing galleries, all wanting to see the human fail. The whole thing was being broadcast across the galaxy. No pressure at all, that the Emperor himself presided over the trial. He looked at Minho with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been disgust. It was hard to tell with the Valith. "Engineer Kang Minho of Earth, you may enter the labyrinth. You will have 4 hours to reach the center. If you fail, you will be removed and the trial will be considered lost. Do you understand?" "I understand," Minho said. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "You may begin." Minho entered the labyrinth. The walls were made of some material that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking directly at it. Psychic energy crackled in the air, making his skin tingle. He could feel the labyrinth trying to get into his head, trying to read his fears and use them against him. But his human mind, chaotic and messy as it was, didn't give the labyrinth clear information to work with. Still, it tried. He saw shadows moving in his peripheral vision, heard whispers in languages he didn't understand. The labyrinth created illusions of his mother looking disappointed, of his father shaking his head in shame. It showed him visions of Earth destroyed, of his friends dead, of failure and humiliation. Minho took a deep breath and reminded himself what Haniel had told him. It's just a building. Underneath all the psychic stuff, it's just a physical structure that has to follow physical rules. He started paying attention to the architecture instead of the illusions. He noticed that some walls were slightly different from others. Some corridors had air currents that suggested openings in specific directions. He used his engineer's training to map the physical space, ignoring the psychic attacks as much as he could. The labyrinth didn't like that. It increased the intensity of its attacks. Minho saw himself failing the trial, saw Lyra turning away from him in disgust, saw the human delegation being expelled from the Imperium. The visions were vivid and terrifying, but they were also predictable. The labyrinth was using standard psychological warfare, the kind that would work on species that relied on psychic combat. Minho pulled out a small device he'd built in the last 6 days. It was simple, just a modified sensor from the human ship that could detect energy signatures. He used it to map the psychic power distribution throughout the labyrinth. Where the psychic energy was strongest, the physical structure was usually weakest. The labyrinth's builders had relied so much on the mental components that they'd made the actual architecture secondary. He found a wall that was almost pure psychic projection. Behind it, his sensor detected an open space. Minho pulled out another tool, a basic cutting torch. He started cutting through the wall where the physical material was thinnest. In the viewing galleries, the audience started murmuring. This wasn't how the trial was supposed to work. You were meant to navigate the labyrinth mentally, not cut through it with tools. But there was no rule against it. No one had thought to make such a rule because no one had ever tried it before. Minho cut through 3 walls, taking shortcuts that bypassed entire sections of the labyrinth. The psychic attacks became more desperate, more chaotic. He saw visions of Alira dying, of the universe ending, of everything he cared about turning to ash. His hands shook, but he kept working. 2 hours and 17 minutes after entering, Minho stepped into the center chamber of the labyrinth. He'd made it. The room fell silent. Even the psychic attacks stopped, as if the labyrinth itself was too surprised to continue. The Emperor stood slowly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he said, "The trial is complete. Engineer Kong Minho has reached the center. The trial of mind is past." The chamber erupted. Some aliens were cheering, clearly entertained by the unexpected approach. Others were protesting, arguing that Minho had cheated. Lord Fevrin looked like he wanted to leap from his seat and attack Minho personally. Minho walked out of the labyrinth on shaky legs. Ji Wung was there to catch him as he stumbled. "You crazy bastard. You actually did it." "One down," Minho managed. 4 to go. The trial of combat came 3 days later. Minho's opponent was a Kravish warrior named Grethek, who stood 3 meters tall and was covered in natural armor plating. Grethek had been a champion fighter for over 50 years. He looked at Minho the way someone might look at an insect. The combat arena was a large, circular space with various terrain features. There were boulders, trenches, and obstacles scattered throughout. The rules were simple. The fight continued until one fighter yielded or was unable to continue. Lethal force was discouraged, but not forbidden. Ambassador Yuna had found old records of human military tactics and spent the last 3 days drilling them into Minho's head. "You can't beat him with strength," she'd said. "Don't even try. You need to be smarter, faster, and more unpredictable." The fight began. Grethek charged immediately, expecting to end this quickly. Minho dove behind a boulder, barely avoiding a strike that would have broken his bones. He ran, using the terrain to stay away from the Kravish warrior. The audience started booing. They wanted a fight, not a chase. But Minho wasn't running away. He was studying his opponent. Grethek was strong and tough, but he was also heavy. He moved in predictable patterns. His armor covered most of his body, but had joints that needed flexibility. And he was getting frustrated. Minho led Grethek on a chase around the arena, staying just out of reach. He used the trenches and obstacles, making the bigger warrior work for every step. Grethek was breathing harder now, his movements slightly slower. All that mass took energy to move. Then Minho did something unexpected. He stopped running and stood in an open area. Grethek, seeing his chance, charged at full speed. At the last possible second, Minho dropped flat to the ground. Grethek, unable to stop his momentum, crashed into a boulder behind where Minho had been standing. While Grethek was dazed, Minho grabbed a piece of loose cable he'd noticed earlier and looped it around the warrior's ankle joints. It wouldn't hold for long, but it didn't need to. When Grethek tried to move, he stumbled. His own weight and momentum worked against him, and he fell hard. Minho didn't give him time to recover. He grabbed a handful of arena sand and threw it at the gaps in Grethek's helmet, right where his eyes were. The warrior roared and swung blindly. Minho used a boulder as a ramp, jumped, and delivered a kick to a weak point in Grethek's neck armor that Haniel had identified from biological scans. It wasn't a powerful kick. Minho didn't have the strength to really hurt the Kravish. But it was precise, hitting nerves that caused temporary paralysis. Grethek collapsed, unable to move his right side. "Yield," Minho said, standing over the fallen warrior. "Please, I don't want to hurt you more than necessary." Grethek stared up at him in disbelief. Then, slowly, he laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound. "You fight like a human. Tricky, annoying. I yield." The crowd went wild. Minho had defeated a Kravish champion using nothing but tactics and strategy. The Emperor's expression was unreadable, but the Empress was smiling. The trial of wisdom came next. The candidates were presented with an ancient philosophical paradox that had stumped scholars for generations. It dealt with the nature of consciousness free will, and the relationship between individual choice and collective good. Very deep stuff that made Minho's head hurt just reading it. The other candidates gave elaborate answers full of references to ancient texts and philosophical traditions. They spoke for hours, building complex arguments that sounded impressive, even when Minho didn't understand half the words they used. When it was Minho's turn, he stood before the council of judges and said, "I'm not a philosopher. I'm an engineer. But I think maybe the question is wrong." The judges looked at each other. "Explain," one of them said. "This paradox assumes that individual choice and collective good are opposed to each other. But they're not, or they don't have to be. On Earth, we've learned that the strongest societies are the ones where individuals have the freedom to choose, but also recognize their connection to others. We're not separate from the collective, but we're not absorbed by it either." He thought about Alira, about her choosing him despite the collective expectations of her entire civilization. The answer isn't choosing one over the other. It's recognizing that the individual and the collective create each other. You can't have a healthy society without individuals who can think and choose freely. And individuals can't become their best selves without being part of something bigger than themselves. Minho shrugged. Maybe that's not the kind of answer you're looking for, but it's how humans see it. The judges deliberated for a long time. Finally, the chief judge spoke. "Your answer lacks the traditional philosophical rigor, but it demonstrates an understanding of practical ethics that is often missing from theoretical discussions. The trial of wisdom is past. 2 trials left. The trial of artistry and the trial of union." Minho was halfway there, but the hardest challenges were still ahead. The trial of artistry was different from the others. Instead of proving strength or wisdom, the candidates had to create something beautiful that expressed why they were worthy of standing beside Princess Alira. The other candidates had weeks to prepare. Minho had days. He watched the other presentations first. A Lumari noble created a symphony of light that told the story of their entire civilization in pure color and movement. It was breathtaking, bringing tears to many in the audience. A Theban artist grew a living sculpture that bloomed with flowers that sang in harmony. A Valith duke created a telepathic experience that let everyone in the audience share. A perfect memory of joy, not each creation was more impressive than the last. They used technology and abilities that humans couldn't dream of matching. Minho sat backstage with his simple creation and wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. "You okay?" Haniel asked. She'd come to support him, along with Ji Woon and Ambassador Yuna. "I'm about to present something I made in a workshop with basic tools, while everyone else is literally creating magic." Minho said, "I'm terrified." "Then show them why simple matters," Ji Woon said. "You've gotten this far by being yourself. Don't stop now." When Minho's turn came, he walked onto the stage carrying a small wooden box. It looked crude compared to the living sculptures and light symphonies. He could hear people in the audience whispering, wondering if this was some kind of joke. He set the box on the presentation table and wound a small key on its side. Then he opened it. Music played. It was a simple melody, the kind a child might hum. The tune came from a mechanical music box that Minho had built by hand, using techniques his mother had taught him years ago. The wooden gears turned, striking metal tines that produced clear, pure notes. "This is a traditional human creation called a music box," Minho said to the silent audience. "There's no advanced technology, no psychic enhancement, just wood and metal and physics. My mother taught me how to make these when I was young. This melody is a lullaby she used to sing to me and my sister." He let the music play for a moment. "I can't create light symphonies or telepathic experiences. I don't have those abilities. But I can create something honest. This music box represents what I can offer, not grand promises or impressive displays. Just genuine craftsmanship, simple beauty, and a connection to family and tradition. Minho looked up at where Alira sat with her parents. Your Highness chose me knowing I was just a human engineer. She didn't choose me for what I could pretend to be. She chose me for what I actually am. This music box is what that looks like. Simple, honest, and made with care. The music box wound down, the last notes fading into silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Empress stood and began to clap. Slowly, others joined her. It wasn't the thunderous applause the other candidates had received, but it was genuine. The judges conferred quietly. The chief judge finally spoke. Engineer Minho, your creation lacks the technical sophistication of the other entries. However, it demonstrates an understanding of what art truly is. Honest expression and emotional connection. The trial of artistry is past. Minho merely collapsed with relief. 4 down, 1 to go, but the final trial would have to wait. That night, as Minho returned to his quarters, Ji Woong pulled him aside. We have a problem. A big one. In a secure room, Ambassador Yuna showed Minho security footage. It showed several armed figures entering the palace through a service entrance. We intercepted communications about an assassination plot. Someone hired mercenaries to kill you before the final trial. Let me guess, Minho said. Lord Thevron? We can't prove it, Yuna said. But yes, almost certainly. He has powerful allies who want you gone. The Valith security forces are investigating, but they might not find everyone in time. Ji Woong finished. I'm doubling your security detail. You don't go anywhere alone until this is over. That night, the assassins struck. Minho was in his room, reviewing notes for the final trial, when his door exploded inward. 3 figures in dark armor rushed in, weapons ready. Minho dove behind a desk just as energy blasts tore through where he'd been standing. Ji Woong appeared from the adjoining room, firing a weapon he'd borrowed from Valith security. He hit one assassin, but there were more in the hallway. Go, he shouted to Minho. The balcony. Minho ran for the balcony, but another assassin was already there, cutting off his escape. He was trapped between attackers, with no weapons and no way out. This was it. He was going to die in an alien palace, killed by people who thought humans didn't belong among the stars. Then the wall exploded. Valith guards poured through, their crystalline skin glowing with psychic energy. But they weren't alone. Graphic, the Kravish warrior Minho had defeated, was with them, roaring and smashing assassins aside like toys. And there, coordinating the defense with military precision, was one of the Theban nobles who'd competed in the trials. The fight was over in seconds. The assassins were captured or killed. Minho stood in the wreckage of his room, shaking with adrenaline. You okay? Graphic asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone so large. I think so, Minho said. Why did you help me? You beat me fairly in combat. That makes you worthy of respect. And besides, Graphic grinned, showing many teeth, I like you. You fight dirty. It's refreshing. The Theban noble approached, its multiple limbs folding in what Minho had learned was a gesture of respect. You have earned allies, human. Not everyone in the Imperium opposes your match with the princess. Some of us believe that new voices, new perspectives, can only make us stronger. Over the next few hours, investigators traced the assassination plot directly to Lord Thevron. The evidence was undeniable. The Emperor was forced to act. Thevron's family was powerful. Instead of execution, he was exiled from court and stripped of his titles. It was a compromise that satisfied no one, but it meant Minho would live to face the final trial. Alira came to visit him while he was packing his belongings from the destroyed room. She looked furious and frightened and relieved all at once. I could have lost you before we even had a chance. But you didn't, Minho said. Your security forces, and apparently my new alien friends, made sure of that. New friends, Elira repeated softly. You've been here less than 2 weeks, and you've already changed things. Grathek never speaks to anyone outside his own species. The Thevan noble who helped you is from a family that usually opposes any change to tradition. Yet they risked themselves to save you. Maybe they just like underdogs, Minho suggested. Or maybe they see what I see, Elira said. Someone who treats others with respect, regardless of their species. Someone who proves himself through actions rather than words. Someone who reminds us all that worth isn't about power or abilities, but about character. She touched his hand briefly, a gesture that would be considered scandalous if anyone saw. One more trial, Minho, the trial of union. It's the hardest one because it's not about proving a skill. It's about proving why we belong together. Do you have any advice? Minho asked. Elira smiled. Yes, be honest. That's all anyone can really ask. The trial of union was scheduled for the next day. It would be held in the grand arena before the largest audience yet. Minho spent the night preparing, but not in the way he prepared for the other trials. This time, he wasn't studying tactics or building devices. He was simply thinking about why he was doing this. Was it just because he'd been chosen? Was it duty to Earth? Was it political opportunity? Or was it something else, something simpler and more complicated at the same time? He thought about Elira's sad eyes at the ceremony, her relief when she found someone whose thoughts she couldn't read, her genuine smile when he'd accepted her choice. He thought about how lonely it must be to never have privacy, to never experience mystery or genuine surprise in relationships. Minho realized that he wasn't doing this just for Earth or duty or politics. He was doing it because Elira deserved a choice. She deserved someone who saw her as a person, not a position. And if he could be that person, then maybe all of this was worth it. The morning of the final trial arrived. Minho dressed carefully, wearing a formal suit that combined human and Vaylith styles. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. 2 weeks ago, he'd been a simple engineer. Now he was about to stand before billions of beings and explain why a human belonged at the side of an alien princess. Ready? Ji Woong asked from the doorway. No, Minho said honestly. But I'm going anyway. That's the spirit, Ji Woong grinned. Go show them what humans are made of. The grand arena held millions of spectators. Every seat was filled. Beings from across the galaxy had come to witness the final trial. Billions more watched through quantum broadcasts on thousands of worlds. The air hummed with anticipation and tension. Minho stood in the center of the arena, feeling very small and very alone. The Emperor presided from the royal platform, with the Empress at his side. Elira sat between them, her face carefully neutral, but her eyes met Minho's across the distance. The trial of union, the Emperor announced, his voice amplified across the arena. The final test. Each candidate must demonstrate why they are worthy to stand beside the heir to the Imperium, why their union would strengthen our civilization, why they deserve this highest of honors. He gestured to the arena floor. Lord Fevrin was to have presented first, but his exile has removed him from consideration. Therefore, Engineer Kong Minho of Earth, you will present alone. Show us why a human belongs at the side of a Vaylith princess. Minho took a deep breath. No pressure at all. Just the future of human-alien relations, and his entire planet's standing in galactic civilization, depending on what he said in the next few minutes. Your Imperial Majesties, honored guests, beings of the Imperium, he began. I'm not going to lie to you. When I came to this planet 2 weeks ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here. I was just an engineer. I am still just an engineer, I can't read minds. I can't create light symphonies. I don't have territories to offer or fleets to command. He gestured to himself. I come from Earth, a planet you all considered primitive until very recently. By the standards of the Imperium, humans are weak. We're slow. We die easily. We don't have natural weapons or armor or psychic abilities. If you're judging worthiness by power alone, then I have no business being here. The crowd murmured. This wasn't the kind of speech they'd expected. Most candidates spent this time boasting about their strengths, not admitting weaknesses. But here's what humans do have, Minho continued. We survive. We've survived ice ages and plagues and wars. We've survived droughts and floods and disasters that should have wiped us out. We survive because we adapt. We learn. We solve problems in ways no one expects because we don't have the luxury of relying on superior abilities. He started walking slowly around the arena floor, making sure he could be seen from all angles. Humans are good at one thing above everything else. We figure things out. We look at impossible situations, and we find ways to make them possible. You've seen that in the trials. I passed the trial of mind, not by fighting psychically, but by treating it as an engineering problem. I won the trial of combat, not through strength, but through strategy. I approached the trial of wisdom from a practical perspective instead of a theoretical one. And for the trial of artistry, I offered honesty instead of spectacle. Is that supposed to impress us? Someone shouted from the crowd. You admit you're weak and say your only skill is figuring things out? Yes, Minho said simply. Because that's what partnerships are about. Not two people who are the same, but two people who complement each other, who make each other stronger by being different. He turned to face the royal platform directly. Princess Alira comes from a civilization built on telepathy and mental connection. She's powerful, intelligent, and has abilities I can't even imagine. But do you know what she told me? She said that every person she's ever met, she can read their thoughts. She knows their motives, their secrets, their calculations. She's never experienced mystery. She's never had to trust someone without knowing exactly what they're thinking. The arena was completely silent now. Everyone was listening. She chose me because I'm different. Because my human mind doesn't work the way Valith minds work. Because when she looks at me, she doesn't see thoughts and motives laid bare. She sees someone she has to actually talk to, communicate with, and learn to trust the old-fashioned way. Through words and actions and time together. Minho looked up at Alira. I can't offer her wealth or territory. I can't offer her psychic power or military might. But I can offer her something she's never had before. Genuine partnership with someone who sees her as a person first and a princess second. Someone who chose to be here because they want to be, not because they're calculating political advantages. He turned back to the Emperor. You asked me to prove why a human belongs at her side. I think the better question is, why shouldn't a human belong at her side? Because we're different? Because we're not as advanced? Or because we challenge the assumptions the Imperium has held for thousands of years? Minho took one more breath and asked the question that had been building inside him. Your Majesty, with all respect, I have a question for you. And for everyone here. The Emperor raised one crystalline eyebrow. Speak. Do you believe Princess Alira is capable of making her own choices? Do you believe she's intelligent enough, wise enough, and strong enough to know what she wants? The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. You didn't question the Emperor. You certainly didn't challenge him in front of billions of witnesses. But Minho pressed on. Because if you believe she's worthy of being the next ruler of the Imperium, then you have to trust her judgment. And she chose me. Not because I tricked her. Not because I used some human deception. But because she looked at all the options available to her and decided that I was what she wanted. He spread his hands, So this trial isn't really about me proving my worth. It's about whether you trust her, whether you believe in her ability to make decisions. Because if you reject her choice, you're saying she's not wise enough to choose her own partner. And if she's not wise enough for that, how can she be wise enough to rule? The silence that followed was absolute. No one had ever put it quite that way before. The Emperor stared at Mino for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. It was a small smile, but genuine. You argue like a politician, Engineer Minho, not like an engineer at all. He stood from his throne. You make a compelling point. This trial was designed to test your worthiness. But perhaps we should also ask my daughter what she thinks. He turned to Alira. Daughter, you have heard his words. You have watched him face these trials. Do you still choose this human? Alira stood. She removed her formal crown, setting it aside. Then she did something that shocked everyone. She stepped down from the royal platform and walked down to the arena floor. Guards moved to follow her, but the Emperor waved them back. She walked across the arena to where Minho stood and took his hand in hers. The touch of her crystalline skin against his human skin created a small spark of light. Yes, she said clearly. I still choose him. I will always choose him. She turned to face her father. All my life, I've been told what to do, who to be, how to act. I've been groomed to rule, to make decisions that affect billions of lives. But I've never been allowed to make a decision about my own life. Until now. Minho is right. If you don't trust me to choose my own partner, how can you trust me to rule? And if you do trust me to rule, then trust me in this too. I know what I want. I know who I want. And I choose to spend my life with someone who treats me like a person, who makes me laugh, who challenges me to think differently, and who had the courage to stand in this arena and question an emperor because he believes I deserve the right to choose. The Empress stood then, joining her husband. Kelvin, my love, do you remember when we were young? When your parents opposed our union because they thought I wasn't from a prestigious enough family. The Emperor looked at his wife. I remember. I fought for you then. And was it worth it? She asked gently. Every moment, he said softly. The Empress looked at her daughter. Then let our daughter have what we had. Let her fight for her choice. And let us support her, as your parents eventually supported us. The Emperor was quiet for a long time. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. Finally, he spoke. Engineer Kang Minho of Earth, you have passed the 5 trials. More importantly, you have shown that worthiness cannot be measured by power or abilities alone. It must be measured by character, by integrity, and by the content of one's actions. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. The union between Princess Alira and Engineer Kang Minho is hereby recognized and approved. Furthermore, humanity shall be welcomed as full members of the Galactic Imperium, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. The arena erupted in noise. Some were cheering, some were protesting, but everyone was reacting. History had been made. A human and a Valith princess. It would change everything. Minho looked at Alira, who was smiling at him with tears in her crystalline eyes. We did it, she whispered. You did it, Minho corrected. I just showed up and tried not to die. She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. The months that followed were busy. There were ceremonies and negotiations and political meetings that made Minho's head hurt. Ambassador Yuna worked tirelessly to secure Earth's position in the Imperium. Treaties were signed. Trade agreements were established. Cultural exchange programs were created. Haniel stayed on the Valith, homeworld, to help establish the first joint human-alien research facility. Her work combining human and alien biology was already making breakthroughs that benefited both species. Ji Weng trained the first integrated security force, proving that humans and aliens could work together effectively. And Minho learned what it meant to be the partner of someone who would one day rule an empire. He attended state dinners and diplomatic events. He learned alien customs and languages. He made mistakes and learned from them. Slowly, he became not just Illyra's chosen partner, but someone the Imperium could respect in his own right. The wedding ceremony combined human and Valith traditions. Minho's mother came from Earth, bringing the music box he'd created for the trial of artistry. She gave it to Illyra as a welcoming gift, and Illyra cried as she accepted it. "Welcome to our family," Minho's mother said, hugging the alien princess who would be her daughter-in-law. Years passed. Minho and Illyra changed the Imperium in ways both large and small. Mixed species councils became common. Human innovation sparked a renaissance across dozens of worlds. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization for millennia began to soften, making room for new voices and new ideas. When Illyra's father finally retired and she became empress, Minho stood beside her at the coronation. He wore formal robes that marked him as imperial consort, but underneath he was still just Kong Minho, the engineer from Earth who'd somehow ended up married to the most powerful woman in the galaxy. "Are you ready for this?" Illyra asked him quietly as they prepared to enter the throne room. "No," Minho admitted, "but I stopped being ready for things the moment you chose me. I've been improvising ever since." She laughed and took his hand. "Then let's keep improvising together." They walked into the throne room together. Human and Valith, engineer and empress. Partners who'd proven that the galaxy was big enough for all kinds of love and all kinds of worthiness. Behind them, new generations grew up in an Imperium that valued diversity and different perspectives. The story of the alien princess who chose a human became legend, told on 1,000 worlds to 1,000 different species. And the lesson was always the same. Worthiness isn't about where you come from or what powers you have. It's about who you are, what you do, and the courage to be yourself, even when the entire galaxy is watching.